Now, everybody knows that this is not necessarily a political channel. I typically talk about music, entertainment, news, things going on in pop culture, stuff like that. But today we're going to have a little conversation about what's been going on in the Supreme Court, all of the different voting that's been taking place. People are definitely in an uproar about some of these decisions, but I want to go over a few of them just so we know where we stand in this country at this current time. Okay? So the hot topic as of today is student loan forgiveness. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court had a conservative majority which rejected Joe Biden's plan to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in student loan debt. It was actually around 400 billion. Writing for the majority in a case filed by several Republican-led states, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. said that the administration was overstepping its authority. The court unanimously ruled in a 6-3 vote, and they also challenged that the program lacked enough standing to file this challenge. The justices declined to address their claim. Now, this plan was created to help people economically during the COVID pandemic and would have impacted tens of millions of borrowers, with about 20 million borrowers potentially seeing their balances wiped clean. More than half of the eligible people had applied for the forgiveness program before it was halted by these courts, with the Education Department approving about 16 million applications. Unfortunately, that is over. In addition to student loan forgiveness, they also voted in a free speech and gay wedding website case, okay? The court's conservative majority ruled in favor of an evangelical Christian graphic artist from Colorado who said she was not comfortable making wedding websites for same-sex couples. The state of Colorado requires businesses to offer the same services to everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation. Writing for the majority, Justice Neil M. Gorsuch and the First Amendment protected Lori Smith, who's the designer, from being forced by the state to create messages with speech she does not believe in. This showdown over state public accommodation laws could impact other business owners who want to avoid transactions that say they violate their First Amendment rights. Critics of Smith's position have compared it to racial discrimination, which courts would not allow. But Smith said she wants to avoid celebrating same-sex marriages, not doing business with people who are gay. So she has no problem doing business with people that are gay. She just doesn't want to celebrate same-sex marriage. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she was not in agreement with this, along with two other liberal justices. They claim that this is for the first time giving businesses open to the public the constitutional right to refuse to serve members of a protected class. That dissent did not boil over well, and it did not change anything. So for people in Colorado, if your business does not want to support and patronize with same-sex marriage or same-sex couples, you now have that right to refuse service. Let's see how long it is before Chick-fil-A turns people down in that same way. Another big case is the affirmative action in college admissions, right? Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina. They ruled in a 6-3 vote. Students for Fair Admissions versus President and Fellows of Harvard College, 6-2 vote, canceling out affirmative action in college admissions. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. once again, he said these programs lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives warranting the use of race, right? Colleges say minority admissions, particularly at very selective institutions, they would drop significantly if race is not at least considered. The Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly over the past 45 years that colleges and universities may use race as a factor in building diverse student bodies, a nod to the historic underrepresentation of Blacks and Latinos on campus and the obstacles those groups have faced in American society. Conservatives in the court, led by Justice Clarence Thomas, say such preferences are illegal and unjustified. The liberal justices dissented, saying that this rolls back decades of precedent and subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection, right? So people that come from minority communities will no longer have their race factored in the admissions process. They're no longer going to have any sympathy on the environment that you come from, your economic position, or anything of that matter, right? It's only going to be on academic performance. Sometimes that can be a good thing for those that excel, and for those that have a harder time and come from rougher backgrounds where they're not able to focus as intently on education. If you still want to have a college education, it's going to become a little bit tougher for you. So that's what we have here. Supreme Court is on some bullshit. Now, what they decided to support, time off for the Sabbath. The justices on June 29th sided in part with a former part-time mail carrier who is an evangelical Christian who had sued the U.S. Postal Service over having to work on Sundays delivering Amazon packages. Former mail carrier asked the justices to overturn decades-old Supreme Court decision in a unanimous opinion authored by Justice Samuel Alito Jr. The court declined to overturn precedent, but said Title VII of the Civil Rights Act requires employers who want to deny religious accommodations to show that granting such requests will result in substantial increased cost. So while the justices did not go as far as the former mail carrier asked, they did strengthen protections for workers seeking religious accommodation. The court's opinion said that when facing an accommodation request, employers have to do more than decide that making other employees work overtime would constitute an undue hardship. Instead, the opinion said they must weigh other options such as voluntary shift swapping. So you can't just deny somebody that says it's against their religion to work on Sundays. You have to at least do what you can to fill their shift. Now, if you can't, then I guess you can still make them work, but you have to go through certain process to do that. So for those that refuse to work on the Sabbath, you have a little bit more backing. They voted 6-3 on federal election laws and redistricting. It basically states that state legislatures do not have unlimited power to decide the rules for federal elections. The Constitution's elections clause does not insulate state legislatures from the ordinary exercise of state judicial review. So taking state courts out of the equation would have been a major shift in election law and would have granted extensive power to legislators, would have given them way too much power, and would have made the election process even more unethical than it currently is. They also ruled in online messages and threats, Counterman versus Colorado, in a 7-2 vote. The justices said that to be convicted of making threats, a defendant must have some awareness of how their words will be interpreted by the recipient, even if the defendant is not actually planning to carry out the threat or cause the recipient harm. With online threats and angry speech becoming more popular in American society, the court's decision will shape who can be prosecuted for threats and who can't. They also voted on immigration and deportation in an 8-1 vote in United States versus Texas. On June 23rd, they ruled for Biden administration, saying it would not interfere in the executive branch's decision to focus deportation efforts on recent border crossers and immigrants deemed to pose a threat to public safety, rather than millions of other non-citizens who have lived here for years. Texas and Louisiana challenged this policy, but the justices ruled 8-1 that they lacked standing to do so. So the Biden administration can now reinstate its guidelines, which had been halted by lower courts. The White House, which has always enjoyed wide rule on how to enforce immigration laws, says Congress has not appropriated enough money for the Department of Homeland Security to seek the removal of everyone who entered this country illegally. The Republican-led states argued prioritizing only some undocumented immigrants for deportation conflicted with federal law because, as we know, in these southern Republican-led states, they really hate immigrants. They really hate Spanish immigrants more specifically. They want them out of here. They feel like they're eating up the jobs. But it's the jobs you motherfuckers don't want to do anyway. Also voted on Native American adoptions. Okay? The justices upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act, a 1978 law that gives preference to the foster care and adoption of Native American children by their relatives and tribes. The law had been challenged by 7 individuals in 3 states, led by Texas, arguing that while Congress has vast power over issues relating to tribes in other areas, it overreached here. The majority said they would not disturb a lower court's conclusion that this act is unconstitutional. Tribal leaders said the law was passed to rectify years of government misdeeds involving the removal of children from Native American families and that it is essential to the independence of their tribes. Critics said the law requires officials to put aside the traditional standard of doing what's best for the child and relies on racial discrimination in ways the Constitution does not allow. The ruling will impact sensitive decisions about whether Native children are inherently better off with their relatives or other tribal members and could affect other aspects of Native American life. So you can't just remove these kids from their home. They also voted on race and congressional districts in a 5-4 decision in favor of the liberals, okay? So a divided court ruled that the Voting Rights Act requires Alabama to create a second congressional district out of 7 in the state, where black voters make up a large enough share of the electorate to have a clear chance to determine who is elected. Alabama had argued, quote unquote, this racial gerrymandering would violate traditional redistricting guidelines and the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection under the law. About 27% of the state's electorate is black. So relieving states of this requirement that they take race into account when drawing voting maps, this would have been a major change in the U.S. election law that could have led to a decline in the number of non-white lawmakers in Congress. This 5-4 decision was a surprise for the right-leaning court and a defeat for its most conservative people. It follows a string of recent decisions that weaken provisions of the Voting Rights Act. So thankfully, they got something right out there in Alabama because they were trying to keep non-white and black people from having a say in who gets elected and having seats in the actual electorate to make change. They also ruled in a 9-0 vote in Liability of Big Tech, basically saying that Google and Twitter, they show terrorist content or content related to terrorists or content that may be in support of terrorists, right? And unfortunately, the families of terrorist victims were trying to sue to say that Google, Twitter, and other social media platforms are basically aiding and abetting attacks on their loved ones. Unfortunately, there's just not enough information to make a plausible case, so they had to rule in favor of Google and Twitter, basically taking away their liability for offensive content that they're being shown, because you can't actually put the onus on Google and Twitter for what individuals are posting. So there we have it. The Supreme Court, they've been hard at work over the past few months trying to get some things worked out in the United States. Some have been good, some have been bad, some have been egregious. At this point, we can't change anything. The most that anyone could do is cause a ruckus, continue to fight, continue to stand vigilant in the things that you want to see done in this country. Vote in your midterms, not just on presidential elections. But at the end of the day, man, it just seems that we're taking quite a few steps backwards as far as the mainstream America goes. A lot of changes are being made. As you saw, the two big headlines, of course, are student loan forgiveness and affirmative action. These are things that will definitely affect black, non-white, people of color, minority communities, probably the most. But all people could have definitely benefited from the student loan forgiveness of taking away $400 billion in student loan debt. Unfortunately, the government does not see this fit. So Joe Biden's attempt to rectify that was shot down. I don't think you should blame Biden. There's people out there that are going to say it's his fault. They're going to say this is the only thing they were looking forward to in his entire presidency. And unfortunately, this is going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. But again, this is not his fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. The Supreme Court ruled and put the iron fist down. Let me know what y'all think of all of this in the comments. I know, again, this is not a political channel, but sometimes it's good to talk about things that will directly affect us, especially when it comes to freedom of the press, which was also kind of talked about in these hearings when they talk about social media and things of that nature. And sometimes we just need to break away from the pop culture stuff, the music and all of that stuff, because it can distract us from what's really important. Not everybody's going to sit through this. I totally understand it. But for those of you that made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. Be sure to like and share this video. If this is your first time seeing me on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the post notification bell for all updates. And I will see you all on the next one. Much love and respect. Stay safe out there. Peace.